The most dangerous adversary is not the one with the most tanks, but the one with nothing left to lose. According to former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Admiral James Stavridis, the Islamic Republic of Iran has entered what Sun Tzu called death ground. This is a psychological and strategic state, where a force, facing an existential threat with no way to retreat, resorts to a level of violence that ignores the traditional rules of escalation. This matters because a cornered Iran has the capability to dismantle the global economic order in a single afternoon. If the regime believes its end is inevitable, the incentive to play by the rules of international diplomacy vanishes. The winner in this scenario is no one. The loser is a global civilization built on the assumption of predictable trade. We are no longer discussing a regional skirmish. We are discussing the potential spark for a third world war. The question is, if Iran is truly on death ground, what is the cost of the final stand? To understand the scale of this threat, we have to look at the global supply chain equilibrium. This is the invisible system that keeps the lights on in London, the factories running in Shanghai, and the supermarkets stocked in New York. The world operates on a just-in-time model, meaning we don't store resources, we move them. The heart of this movement is the Middle East, specifically the Strait of Hormuz. This system exists because of geographic efficiency. 1/5 of the world's oil and 1/3 of its liquefied natural gas flow through a 21-mile-wide channel. In economic terms, this is a single point of failure. If a computer system has one cord that, if pulled, shuts down the entire network, that cord is Hormuz. Cause and effect logic dictates that if the flow of energy stops, the price of everything from plastic to food to transportation skyrockets instantly. This isn't just an oil crisis, it is a global metabolic collapse. The path to this death ground was paved by a shift from proxy warfare to existential engagement. For decades, the conflict between Iran and the West was fought in the shadows, through cyber attacks, economic sanctions, and regional militias. This was a system of managed tension. Both sides had an incentive to avoid a direct, total war because the costs were too high. The power dynamics shifted in 2026. A series of direct military strikes by the US and Israel, combined with mounting internal pressures within the Iranian regime, removed the middle ground. The maximum pressure campaign, intended to force a diplomatic surrender, instead pushed the Iranian leadership into a corner where they perceived the goal was not a new deal, but their total eradication. When a regime believes its survival is no longer possible through negotiation, its economic and military incentives shift toward total retaliation. The mechanism of this retaliation is strategic asymmetry. Iran knows it cannot win a traditional naval battle against a US carrier strike group. Instead, they utilize a swarm and choke doctrine. This involves thousands of small, fast-attack boats, sea mines, and land-based anti-ship missiles hidden in the coastal mountains. This is the suicide of a choke point. Think of it like a crowded doorway. You don't need a tank to block the door. You just need to set the carpet on fire. By flooding the strait with low-cost drones and mines, Iran can make the waters uninsurable. No commercial shipping company will send $1 billion tanker into a zone where the risk of loss is 50%. The mechanism doesn't require Iran to own the water. They only need to make it unusable. Simultaneously, a regime on death ground can deploy non-kinetic weapons, such as wide-scale cyber attacks on Western electrical grids or financial hubs, turning the war from a regional naval battle into a domestic crisis for every NATO member. The consequences of a death ground escalation are divided into immediate shock and systemic decay. The primary winners are the alternative energy producers and nations with massive domestic oil reserves, such as Russia, who would see their leverage and profits triple overnight. The losers are the energy-dependent industrial economies of Europe and East Asia. For the ordinary person, the consequence is a cost-of-living explosion. If oil prices hit $200 or $300 a barrel, the cost of heating a home or buying groceries becomes a luxury. Governments would be forced to implement energy rationing and emergency price controls, measures not seen since World War II. In the long term, the consequence is a global deglobalization. Corporations would abandon fragile international supply chains in favor of expensive local production, permanently lowering the global standard of living. There is a common misunderstanding that Iran is too weak to start a global war. The myth is that because their conventional air force is dated and their economy is struggling, they are not a threat to the West. This ignores the asymmetric dividend. It is much cheaper to destroy than it is to build. A drone that costs $20,000 can disable a destroyer that costs $2 billion. Most people get wrong the idea that World War III would look like a repeat of the 1940s. A modern global conflict would be a hybrid war. It would be fought in the silicon of banking servers and the logistics of shipping containers. Military figures like General Sir Richard Sheriff warned that the conflict wouldn't stay in the Gulf. It would spiral outward as NATO allies are drawn in by cyber attacks or terror operations in the West, forcing the alliance into a confrontation it has spent decades trying to avoid. The misunderstanding lies in thinking the front line is thousands of miles away. On death ground, the front line is everywhere. What happens next depends on the escalation ladder. There are 3 realistic scenarios for a force on death ground. The first is the breakout sprint. Realizing their conventional defense is failing, Iran chooses to cross the nuclear threshold in a matter of days. This is the ultimate death ground move, using the threat of a nuclear exchange to force an immediate and total halt to all military strikes. This requires a level of technical readiness and political desperation that the regime has reached. The second scenario is the Hormuz blackout. Iran executes its go-big strategy, sinking several large tankers in the narrowest part of the strait and mining the surrounding waters. This effectively severs the energy artery of the world. The condition for this is a total collapse of diplomatic backchannels, leaving the regime with the belief that their only leverage is global economic destruction. The third scenario is internal fracture. The pressure of being on death ground causes the Iranian military or political leadership to split. A portion of the leadership, fearing total annihilation, attempts a coup or seeks a separate peace. This is the most optimistic scenario, but it is also the most volatile, as it could lead to a chaotic civil war in a nation with a vast chemical and ballistic missile stockpile. We are witnessing a shift from the rational actor model of geopolitics to a desperation model. When Admiral Stavridis warns of death ground, he is warning that the traditional calculations of risk and reward no longer apply. The Iranian regime is no longer playing for a better seat at the table. They are playing to avoid the gallows. If the goal of the West was to deter Iran, the result has been to push them to a point where deterrence is no longer effective. We have reached a paradox. The more pressure we apply, the more likely the regime is to trigger the very catastrophe we are trying to prevent. As the world's energy heart continues to beat in the shadow of the Alborz Mountains, we are left to wonder, if the doorway to the global economy is about to be set on fire, who is prepared for the darkness that follows?